The acquisition team's due diligence report credited me with identifying the revenue risks 18 months before the deal collapsed. My executive summary from that period was marked "Do not distribute" by leadership. I had the original email thread. Sent February 2023. Subject line: Q3 Revenue Forecast Revision, Risk Assessment. The archived version in the company system showed a different subject line, different attachments, different distribution list. Someone had replaced my warning with a sanitized projection that showed 40% growth instead of the 15% decline I'd actually predicted. The acquiring company's valuation dropped from $340 million to $300 million when they discovered the discrepancy during their financial review. They wanted to know who was responsible for the inaccurate forecasting. My CEO told them it was me. My name is Bridget. I was the Director of Financial Planning at a Series B fintech startup in Austin. I built the revenue models. I ran the forecasts. I presented quarterly projections to the board. I'd been warning about the pipeline problem since early 2023. No one wanted to hear it. We had a term sheet with a major acquisition target. The deal was structured around our projected growth rate. Leadership needed the numbers to support a $340 million valuation. My models didn't. I sent my analysis to the CFO, the CEO, and the VP of Sales on February 14, 2023. The email was clear. Revenue was declining. Customer churn was accelerating. The sales pipeline was 60% smaller than the previous quarter. I recommended we revise our annual projection from $28 million to $18 million. The CFO called me 2 hours later. "We can't send this to the board," he said. "It's accurate. It kills the acquisition. It's what the data shows. Revise it." I didn't revise it. I archived the original. I sent a follow-up email confirming my position. I documented the conversation. Then I waited. 3 days later, the board received a financial summary. It showed 40% projected growth, $32 million in revenue, expanding customer base. My name was on the cover page. I hadn't written it. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't send an email asking for clarification. I didn't request a meeting with the CFO. I opened my personal cloud storage and uploaded 3 files: the original forecast, the email thread, and the version that had been sent to the board. Then I went back to work. The acquisition process moved forward. Leadership scheduled regular updates with the acquiring company's due diligence team. I wasn't invited to most of those meetings. The VP of Finance asked me to prepare supporting documentation for the revenue projections. I sent him exactly what he requested: spreadsheets, customer data, pipeline reports. I didn't mention the discrepancy. I didn't offer commentary. I just provided the files. He thanked me and said the acquiring team was impressed with our growth trajectory. I nodded and returned to my desk. 2 weeks later, I received a calendar invitation for a due diligence call. The subject line said, "Revenue Forecast Methodology Review." The attendees included me, the CFO, and 3 executives from the acquiring company. I joined the call 5 minutes early. The acquiring company's financial analyst led the conversation. She asked about my forecasting process, how I built the models, what data sources I used, how often I revised projections. I answered every question directly. I explained the methodology. I walked through the customer cohort analysis. I described the pipeline tracking system. She asked if I'd ever revised a forecast significantly. "Yes," I said. "When was the most recent revision?" "February 2023. "What prompted it?" "Customer churn rate increased from 8% to 14% in Q4 2022. Sales pipeline contracted by 60%. The data indicated revenue would decline rather than grow." There was a pause on the line. The board materials show 40% projected growth for that period, she said. That wasn't my projection. Another pause. Can you send us our original analysis? I looked at the CFO's video tile. His camera was off. Yes, I said. I have the original email and attachments. Please send them to the due diligence team directly. I forwarded the files 10 minutes after the call ended. I didn't hear anything for 3 days. On day 4, the CFO sent a company-wide email announcing that the acquisition due diligence period had been extended by 2 weeks. He said the acquiring company needed additional time to review certain financial documentation. I kept working. I attended team meetings. I updated forecasts for Q2. I responded to emails within normal business hours. No one mentioned the due diligence call. On day 7, I received a calendar invitation from the acquiring company's general counsel. The meeting was titled Financial Documentation Review, Confidential.
The CFO wasn't on the invitation. Neither was the CEO. I joined the call at the scheduled time. The general counsel introduced herself and explained that during their review, they'd identified discrepancies between the financial materials provided to their team and certain internal communications. We found 2 versions of the February 2023 revenue forecast. One shows a projected decline, the other shows significant growth. Can you explain the difference? I explained what happened. The original forecast, the CFO's call, the revised version that appeared in board materials with my name on it. Did you write the revised version? No. Do you have documentation showing you authored the original forecast? Yes. The email metadata, the file creation timestamps, and the original distribution list. Can you send those to us? I sent everything. The email thread, the archived files, the follow-up I'd sent to the CFO confirming my position. The general counsel thanked me and ended the call. I didn't tell anyone about the conversation. 2 days later, the CEO sent a Slack message asking me to join him in a conference room. I walked down the hall and sat across from him. The acquiring company has concerns about our financial projections. I didn't respond. They're asking questions about the February forecast. They say you told them the board materials were inaccurate. They asked me to explain the discrepancy between 2 versions of the same forecast. I told them what happened. You should have come to me first. They asked me a direct question during a due diligence call. I answered it. He leaned back in his chair. This is going to affect the valuation. The inaccurate forecast was going to affect it eventually. We could have managed the narrative. They have both versions now, and the email thread, and the metadata showing when each file was created. His expression didn't change, but he was quiet for a long time. You're suspended, pending an internal review. I stood up and walked back to my desk. I collected my laptop and my notebook. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I sent an email to HR documenting the conversation and requesting clarification on the suspension terms. They responded within an hour. Paid administrative leave, 2 weeks, pending review of my conduct during the acquisition process. I spent the first week organising my documentation. I had 3 years of emails, every forecast I'd ever sent, every model I'd built. Every conversation where leadership had asked me to revise projections to support fundraising or acquisition goals. I created a timeline. February 2023 forecast discrepancy. June 2023 board presentation, where my pipeline analysis was edited without my knowledge. September 2023 investor update, where my churn projections were replaced with retention metrics I hadn't calculated. I didn't know if anyone would ever ask to see it, but I had it ready. On day 9 of my suspension, I received an email from the acquiring company's general counsel. She asked if I'd be willing to participate in a formal interview as part of their revised due diligence process. I agreed. The interview was scheduled for the following week. I joined the call from my apartment. 3 attorneys were on the line. They asked questions for 90 minutes. They wanted to know how often I'd been asked to revise forecasts, whether I'd ever been pressured to change projections, if I'd raised concerns internally about the accuracy of board materials. I answered every question. I referenced specific emails, dates, and conversations. I didn't editorialize. I didn't speculate about intent. I just described what happened. At the end of the interview, the lead attorney asked if I had any other documentation that might be relevant to their review. I sent them the timeline. 2 days later, my suspension was extended indefinitely. HR didn't provide a reason. They just said the review was ongoing and I should remain available for additional questions. I started applying for new positions. I updated my resume. I scheduled interviews with recruiters. I didn't tell anyone I was suspended. When people asked why I'd left, I said the company was going through an acquisition and I'd decided to explore other opportunities. Most people didn't ask for details. 3 weeks after my suspension began, the CEO sent an all-hands email. The acquisition had been restructured. The valuation had been reduced from $340 million to $300 million. The deal would close within 60 days. He didn't explain why the valuation had changed. I received a separate email from HR that afternoon. They wanted to schedule a call to discuss my employment status. I joined the call the next morning. The head of HR and the company's outside counsel were on the line. "We've completed our internal review," the HR director said. "We found that you violated company policy by sharing confidential financial information with an external party without authorization." The acquiring company's due diligence team requested documentation during a scheduled review call, I said. I provided accurate information in response to direct questions. You should have escalated those requests to leadership. The requests came during a formal due diligence process. I'm required to provide accurate information to comply with securities regulations. The outside counsel spoke for the first time. "The company has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately," she said. "You'll receive 4 weeks of severance and continuation of benefits for 60 days. "I'd like that decision in writing," I said. "We'll send the termination letter within 24 hours. The call ended. I didn't hear from anyone at the company for 2 days. Then I received an email from the acquiring company's general counsel. The subject line said, "Board review, testimony request." The email explained that the acquiring company's board had opened a formal investigation into the financial discrepancies identified during due diligence. They were requesting my participation as a witness. I agreed to participate. The board interview was scheduled for the following week. I spent 3 hours on a video call answering questions about the forecast revisions, the February 2023 email thread, and the other instances where my projections had been altered without my knowledge. I provided copies of every document I'd archived, the original forecasts, the edited versions, the email exchanges where leadership had requested changes. The board's outside counsel asked if anyone had ever explicitly told me to falsify financial projections. "No," I said. "They asked me to be more optimistic, to revise my assumptions, to focus on best-case scenarios rather than likely outcomes." "Did you comply with those requests?" I provided alternative scenarios when asked, but I always documented my original analysis and explained why I believed the more conservative projection was accurate.
Did leadership ever acknowledge your concerns? Not in writing. The attorney made a note. Did they ever instruct you not to share your concerns with the board or investors? I thought about that question carefully.
The CFO told me not to send the February 2023 forecast to the board, I said. He said it would kill the acquisition. Do you have documentation of that conversation? I sent a follow-up email confirming the discussion. He didn't respond, but the email is time-stamped. Can you provide that? I sent it during the call. The interview concluded 30 minutes later. I didn't hear anything for 3 weeks. Then the acquisition closed. The final valuation was $298 million. The acquiring company's press release mentioned adjustments based on revised financial projections and additional due diligence findings. My former CEO sent a company-wide email celebrating the exit. He thanked the team for their hard work and dedication. He said everyone should be proud of what they'd built. He didn't mention the valuation reduction. He didn't mention the investigation. 2 days after the acquisition closed, I received a LinkedIn message from the acquiring company's CFO. She said they were building a financial planning team for the combined entity. She asked if I'd be interested in discussing opportunities. I accepted a role as Senior Director of Financial Planning 3 weeks later. The position was based in Austin. The salary was 40% higher than what I'd been making at the startup. My first project was integrating the financial forecasting systems from both companies. I built new models, I established new processes, I implemented controls to ensure that projections couldn't be altered without documented approval from both the preparer and reviewer. The acquiring company's CEO asked me to present the new framework to the board. I explained the methodology, I walked through the controls, I showed examples of how the system would flag discrepancies between original forecasts and revised versions. One of the board members asked why these controls were necessary. Because accurate forecasting requires documentation and accountability, I said. Without both, projections become narratives rather than analysis. The board approved the framework unanimously. 6 months after I started, the General Counsel asked if I'd be willing to meet with her. We sat in her office. She closed the door. The board's investigation concluded, she said. We found that the previous leadership team had systematically revised financial projections to support fundraising and acquisition goals. Your forecasts were accurate. The revisions weren't. I didn't say anything. The former CEO and CFO are no longer with the company, she said. Their departures were part of the acquisition settlement. I didn't know that was being negotiated. It wasn't public, but the board felt it was necessary given the findings. She handed me a folder. This is the investigation summary, she said. Your testimony was instrumental in establishing the timeline and documenting the pattern of revisions. I opened the folder. The summary referenced my February 2023 email thread multiple times. It cited my archived forecasts as evidence of the discrepancy between my analysis and the materials presented to investors. You're welcome to keep that copy, she said. I took it home and filed it with my other documentation. I didn't need vindication. I didn't need acknowledgement. I just needed the record to be accurate.
A year after the acquisition, I was promoted to VP of Financial Planning. My team grew to 12 people. We built forecasting models for 3 business units. I never worked with my former CEO again. I heard he'd joined another startup. I didn't follow his career. Sometimes people asked me about my time at the previous company, about the acquisition, about why the valuation had dropped. I told them the truth. The projections were revised during due diligence to reflect actual performance. They rarely asked for more detail. The investigation summary was still in my filing cabinet. I hadn't looked at it in months. But I knew where it was.